Hey, it's Jared from Coda. In this video, we're going to build out the content types that we need in Sanity in order to build the back end for a page builder setup in the next several videos in Gatsby. So the first thing we're going to do is head on into, not web, into our studio directory, go into our schemas and find our documents. Now, off screen between the last video and this one, I went through and created some of the things that we need for a blog. There's nothing too crazy going on here, and I'll come back to this in a future video when we build out the blog portion of that, but you can kind of ignore some of these additional things for now. So the first thing we're going to do is add a new file called page.js. And now, per the usual, we are going to start with a default export and give it a few properties. So the first thing that we will do is add a title of page, a name of page, and the type will be a document. And now for the fields, we are going to have an array of objects, and per the usual, we will, in fact, I'm going to just grab these here. We need a title of title, a name of title, and this will be a string. And now this is going to be the default page title. And once we get down through the rest of the fields, we're going to build out a reusable sort of SEO field set that will set all of our open graph settings. But this will be the default page title that we will reference both in Sanity as well as when we create the pages as the default title. The next one that we will put down here is the slug, and that is going to have a name, of slug and a type of slug as well. And so a slug takes in a few different options. Now, the first one is you specify the source, and this is when the field opens up. This is sort of the first place it's going to look in order to slugify, so to say, the title. And so we will toss in here that the source is going to be the title. I think it's a good idea sometimes, especially when you end up with maybe a marketer or something in there, maybe putting unnecessarily long page titles. I think it's good to set a max length by default. And now I'm going to kind of hop over here. I'm going to paste in something that I copy and paste between projects. This is right out of Sanity's documentation for the slug type. If you head down to the reference section of their documentation, you'll find this. This is just to say, hey, for the first 200, go ahead and grab the input, return us the slugified version. And now this is some funky regex voodoo that's essentially saying, hey, replace spaces with this. So yeah, that's all we actually need for that. And so for the page, those are the first couple of things we need. And I have this running. And so if we come into our desk, export this out from our documents, it will be added as a content type in our schema. And so there's no pages. Let's go ahead and add one. And so you can already see here we have our title. And if we were to say maybe the typical hello world, generate, and then we will have our slug. And now this is stuff that we'll be using to define all of the routes when we go through and programmatically create pages in Gatsby. So after we have that, this is where it gets kind of fun, and this is where all of the upfront work that we did creating these plugs actually comes in handy. So the next thing that we're going to make is going to be our content. And so let's give this a title of content. Let's actually call this page contents. We will give it a name of content and a description. We don't need a description. This is really just going to be me in here for now. And so typically I would add a description explaining, you could reorder them, move them around, add the list of accepted modules. But since this is just going to be me, I don't think I need to give myself that extra help. And so this is going to be a type of array, and it's going to be an array of objects where we will define the types that are accepted. And so this is just when you've defined all of these things already in your plugs index file. I guess it'd be helpful if we went ahead and actually exported those, huh? So if we came in here, we need to export from features, and we need to export from social callout as well. Sweet. So we have access to those now. And so if we come into this index file, we could go ahead and just grab these 3 names just for some quicker copy and pasting. And so if we have this array of types, we can duplicate this down. Whoops. And now we have our array of accepted types. And now we're going to need some commas. And those will be the types that are accepted into this array. And so as our plugs grow, that's the other place that you'll have to update them, is both in this index file as well as in this page contents, to say that inside of the document type of page, when you get down to your page contents, you have access to add to an array of these things. And what's cool about that is when you go to do the sort of page builder setup that we're going to do in Gatsby, you'll be returned for each page document. You will be returned an array of contents that we can then map over pretty easily and create sort of a cool switch statement that will pass through all of the layouts on the front end and pass all of their data in from one place. And it's pretty neat, in my opinion. So the next thing we're going to do is add the, I lied, really quick. Let's head over here and show you how this works. Whoops, I broke it. There we go. And so now you have this page contents where you have access to these different things that we already made in previous videos. And so if we were to come down to add a hero, you can see that we have the things that we need. And so we could say hero. We could say that we have a subheading. From subheading. Great. And then if we were to add the features, you can see we now have the feature list. And so this gets pretty repetitive, and I'm not going to sit here and go through all of it right now. You don't need to watch me load content, but then you can see that those features that we defined are all here as well. And so we could add a feature, maybe say feature number 1, lorem ipsum $, and then we could add a tag. And now this is cool too, because here is the reference to the tags that we created. And so we could say this one is going to be new. And so just like that, we have the ability to add in all of the features, and all of the things that we did in the last few videos are now just kind of coming together pretty nicely. And so I don't know about you, that's pretty fun for me. I really like these page builder setups. Now, I'm not philosophically necessarily the biggest fan of them. However, I do think there's a lot of value in knowing how these things are done, and realistically, well-designed templates are not enough for marketers. And yeah, I digress. But so we have this going. And so we can hop back into the code. And the next thing that we are going to set up is the open graph settings. And so this is sort of the, kind of the SEO setting, some people would call it, for the pages in Gatsby. So yeah, we'll just run through this real quick. It's going to be name of open graph, and it's going to have a type of open graph, and we have to go and create this here in just a second, but that will be there. So let's copy that name over. And now if you remember, for these sorts of, this is going to be sort of what you'd think of as a group of fields, or you could call it an object. Did we already make it? Oh, I lied. We already have it. I made this off screen. So let's just run through it real quick. So in here, we have the name defined as open graph, and it's a type of an object with some fields. And so this is going to be the title for the page. And so like I said, in this actual page document, we have this title, and that will be sort of the default. But if you want to go in and specify any sort of overrides or any specific things, or maybe a marketing team member wants to come in and mess with titles for SEO purposes or social sharing, you will use this. And so this is what I was talking about with the page descriptions. This is something that I always put in here to remind myself for debugging, that if I'm trying to change a page title, that this is going to be the ultimate source of truth. Just some basic validation here. There's all kinds of information on validation in the Sanity documentation, a description, an image. And so we have this here as well to say that this is what Facebook recommends and that we will resize it. That's something that we do in Gatsby when this component is run through, and we'll walk through that at some point. But yeah, and this is something we haven't talked about yet, but it's a preview. And so when you are actually in Sanity, you can see that all of these pieces of content have sort of their basic little, their preview for those types of content. And now this preview, you can manually define what's going to show up there. And so for here, you can go through this process called selecting and preparing. And so here we can come in and select that we want the title, and we are going to define the route as the route slug current, and that the link is going to be the link. And so, yeah, long story short, you prepare it through this function, you return those values, and then here we're just doing a ternary operator to decide what the route or link to this page is going to be. So this is pretty much cut and paste from a Gatsby starter. I think it's the kitchen sink starter. So there's not a ton here that's really too crazy, and there's a lot of information about this as well. If you just look into it or hop into a Sanity Slack channel, people are always super helpful there with these sorts of things. But yep, so we have that here. Go ahead and save that. And then if we hop into our page, we now have our Open Graph settings where we can add in a title, a description, and a social sharing image that will ultimately be resized and optimized in Gatsby. And so that's it. We could come through and we could obviously add the social call out, and just so we can get all of the stuff we need, just basic in here. And so we only added the one social platform, but now it's connected and we can say YouTube. And what's cool about that is as we add more of those, we don't have to keep managing it in multiple places. If this changes, it changes all over the place. And so that's all we need for this basic page builder setup. Again, this is just a landing page. So this will grow over time, and you'll add and remove things. And eventually you'll have things like what kind of routes. Maybe you want to change the navigation depending on the page that you're on. But based off of what we've even just accomplished so far, I'm sure you can see pretty quickly how simply those things all click together. And what's really cool about that is when we hop into Gatsby, all of this data is formatted exactly how you would expect. And it's a really intuitive process to get everything up and running in Gatsby. So now that we have the basic page builder sort of set up, in the next video, I'll walk through essentially what we need to do in Gatsby to get all of this data pulled in and maybe start creating some pages.